In February 2018, officers from Derbyshire Police found themselves 1,000 miles away on the streets of rural Latvia. Alongside an elite group of Latvian State Police officers, they executed warrants in the dead of night, hunting for the ringleaders of a human trafficking gang. It was the culmination of a massive operation stretching from the streets of Derby to the Baltic States, following a financial paper trail that unearthed wealth, fast cars, mansions, and nearly 30 vulnerable people paying for it all. It was the largest human trafficking operation ever carried out in Derbyshire, one that proved how slavery and labour exploitation is very much alive today. In this series, we will show you how an organised criminal gang were finally brought back to the UK to face justice, and how their criminal empire came crashing down, thanks to one single phone call.
I've got a woman here covered in blood.
Right.
She's been beaten up and she's been insulted by someone here.
Okay, is the person who's beat her up still there?
Yeah, he's still here. He's been a bit violent.
Okay. Are they in the office then?
Yeah, they're in the office.
Do you think we need an ambulance for her?
You need ambulance and the police, I'll be honest with you. As soon as possible.
That initial call about a man assaulting a woman on a street in Normanton led police to a nearby house to try and safeguard the victim and track down the attacker. But it quickly became apparent that there was more to the call than officers initially thought.
Getting a bit too violent now, darling.
Alright, is it just him and her?
The job came in as a domestic, but then it quickly realised that there was a little bit more in-depth investigation that needs to be done just because of the addresses that the local sergeant had been to.
Our investigation led us to an address on Rutland Street, and while we were in that address there were early signs that something wasn't quite right. We were faced with groups of Latvian males that were living sort of on top of each other, if you like. 3 or 4 in a bedroom, no bed in terms of quilt, just a pillow, no furniture there. We could sense from that something wasn't right.
Over the next few days, the hunt for the assault suspect led officers to a number of addresses where they found similar, cramped, dirty conditions filled with men and women with some clear vulnerabilities. It was when the team went to an address in Balaclava Road where the conditions were much worse that the true picture of what they were facing started to become apparent.
And we could see a pattern that was developing, and the conditions in this address were quite alarming. You were talking about 4 or 5 people in a bedroom, heating on full blast, a stench from inside the address where they clearly hadn't showered, they weren't being looked after, that they were clearly vulnerable. And whilst in that address and the pattern that we'd seen from the 2 previous addresses, I felt that something needed to be done, and we needed to take some action because these people were clearly vulnerable and being exploited. To what level was unclear at that time, but the early stages suggested that something wasn't quite right.
He wasn't happy. It started to mention around slavery, people being held against their will, people just living in basically appalling conditions around there, which when we start to look at it from a senior leadership point of view, is it came across as being a domestic, and that could quickly have just put to one side. But I allocated that up to the CID hub. Carl Chetwin obviously got that, and we started to look a little bit more in depth, and he just uncovered more and more and more around people being moved about, going into workplaces, and it's quite obvious that it needed just some dedicated resources just to look at it at an early stage. So it was just a case of, let's just have a look at it and see what comes out and what falls out of the investigation. So it was very up in the air, a bit wishy-washy at first, I'll have to admit around that. But this is uncharted territory for us. You know, we've had slavery investigations and trafficking investigations previously, but when you start to look at it at that really local level and how detailed it can be, you know, for me, it's just how complex is this going to be, and have I got the resources to do it?
What started out as an investigation into a street assault had quickly transformed into a rapidly moving modern slavery and exploitation probe. With alarming speeds, more and more signs of human trafficking became apparent, leading a team of detectives to one obvious conclusion: that a criminal group was trafficking vulnerable people into the UK, putting them out to work and keeping the money for themselves, and it was nestled in the heart of Derby.